I'm Joran Wijngaarden. I'm the founder of Dealroom with some technical difficulties, but everything should be fine now. So I'm going to open this panel, and then I will hand over to Orla in a few minutes. I just wanted to start with a quick demo of the Impact platform that we are launching today. Can you see my screen? Thumbs up. So for those of you who don't know Dealroom, Dealroom is a global startup and innovation database. We track over 1 million startups globally, and we help our clients to discover promising companies. Since a couple of years, we've been wanting to do something around impact and innovation startups, but we also noticed how hard it is to actually do that, and we realized that we really need to do this in partnership with people who have thought about this issue for longer than us, who know what the challenges are with mapping startups, and in addition, we think that it was really important to involve the community as well. So we wanted to create a dedicated database that's open access, and where we can really collaborate with a large group of people, including partners, but also users in creating the ultimate database on this subject. And we're live today. So I'm now I'm in a normal browser. If you go to impact.dealroom.co, you'll be automatically directed to this page, which is kind of the home page of this new database. You can find information about how to add your organization, becoming a partner, explaining where the data comes from. There's also some explanation about definitions. Maybe just briefly talk about who is behind this. So our lead initiator is Impact City, which is the city of The Hague, who will also join the panel in a second. There's us. So we are responsible for basically the foundation of this platform, the data and the research. We're also really proud to work together on this with Danske Bank, who has been really focused on impact in innovation for many years. And finally, Tech Nation, who is I can describe as the Tech Nation started as Tech City and was really like one of the first government-supported organizations was really thinking about how to build an ecosystem. And today we're going to talk about how to build an impact ecosystem. So this is the homepage. Here on the left side of the menu, you can go, for example, to the dashboard, where you can see a kind of an overview of everything what you can do on the platform. So you see here a bunch of cards. I will not go through everything, but just to explain that each card is kind of a gateway to a specific type of data that you can find on the platform. So for example, hot startups. Now sounds exciting, but what is it? You can click on it and it opens up a query where you can see exactly what the data is behind it and how the filter works, so you understand what's behind that. And it works the same way across the dashboard. So I would invite you to just browse each card and see what's behind. For example, here you have suggested searches. So these are search queries made by others. You can think of it as a collection of curated data. And if you click here on suggested searches, it opens up this page where lots of different queries are organized by topic. You can also go directly to startups and scale-ups. Here at the top, you see suggested searches. So you can click on them, such as vertical farming startups. I click on it and it shows me the results with InFarm here at the top. And if you go to Infarm, you can see all type of information about this company, including how they got funded. And for each of these investors, you can also click on it and see, learn more about the investor behind it. One other thing that I also mentioned in the opening ceremony that we're really proud about is jobs. So if you are interested to work for a startup that is trying to solve one of the world's global challenges, this is a great place to start. And you can search obviously by job type, by the type of technology that a company is using, and so forth. So that's just really exciting. Then there are lots of other tools that, if you know the Dealroom platform, you have seen before. And here we're looking at it from the lens of sustainable development goals. So investors, funding rounds. If you want to see how much venture capital funding has been going, so it looks like 2020 is on track to be a record year despite the pandemic. So that's good news. Here you can see exactly what kind of companies there are underlying all that data. There is an investment heat map that allows you to see, for example, by country where investment is taking place. But you can also map it by SDG, and then add here additional filters such as Europe, then B2B companies, etc. And here you see all the investment figures. If you click on the amounts, you see the underlying data. There's a lot more here to discover. You can browse different themes. There's an investor matching tool, which really fits with the overall goal of this platform to accelerate entrepreneurship and to help impact startups make an even bigger impact faster. So I would like to really thank also our partners again, including Impact City, Danske Bank, and Tech Nation. Please feel free to visit the platform today. We're really open also to feedback. You can give us feedback in the comment chat tool on the bottom right. There will be a launch report launched probably tomorrow, I think, and in a few months, and also a bigger report based on the findings of this platform. So thank you very much for listening, and then I'm going to hand it over to Orla.
Cool, thanks. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I'm hoping that in the next few seconds, we're going to be magically joined by our panelists, but looking forward to a good discussion on building impact ecosystems after that intro. So we're going to be joined by George Windsor from Tech Nation, Ko Santing from Impact City, and Mikkel Scott Olsen from Danske Bank, who are partners on the platform that we've launched today. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Maybe we'll start with a few quick intros. So I'm Orla Brown from, I'm head of content at Dealroom. George, do you want to go next?
Yeah, great to be here today. I'm George Windsor, head of insights at Tech Nation, previously at Nesta, and really happy to be here and supporting the launch of the Impact Innovation Database.
Great. Koos, do you want to go next?
Yes, my name is Ko Santing, and I'm the program manager of Impact City. And great to work here with each other on the database with all those great partners. And yeah, happy to be here.
Lovely. And Mikkel? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I hope that you can hear me now. I'm Mikkel. I'm part of the growth and impact team at the Danske Bank and responsible for the Plus Impact platform and the hub platform that we are running for startups. I'm really great to be part of this project, definitely.
Nice. So I think we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about building impact ecosystems, both digital, as we've released today, but also physical and geographical. And we'll hope to get to a few questions at the end as well. So if anyone in the audience has any for the panelists, put them in the chat and I'll try and multitask and get to them at the end. But let's start with a nice broad question. What does impact mean? Maybe a silly question for being here at ImpactFest, but yeah, I think a nice broad way to open, but how can we compare between a company like, say, Vintage, who today we saw there was an acquisition by them of United Wardrobe. How do we compare them with a carbon capture company? And how do we measure their impact? But yeah, in general, what do we mean by impact? George, we start with you.
Yeah, and a really easy question to start with. So thanks, Ola. And I think that's one of the difficulties, and I think that's why it's so important that this database is being released today, because it starts to get at, I guess, the huge variety that exists within the impact ecosystem. And when we're talking about impact, I think we're referring to a number of different things. Fundamentally, we're thinking beyond economics, and we're thinking about social and public good, and we're thinking about, I guess, the influence that companies are having. I think if we nested in terms of company activity, we're thinking about the influence that they're having beyond the wealth that they're creating, or in addition to the wealth that they're creating. I think there are some great examples, and obviously as a Tech Nation, we're really interested in what's happening in the UK, and I think understanding that in the context of Europe is great. We know that Europe's obviously performing incredibly strongly, and the UK is too. Seeing UK impact startups raising sort of 1.4 billion euro this year already, I think is incredibly positive. From our perspective, we're seeing impact through mainly, I guess, areas like net zero, energy and environment. That's one of the areas that we're focusing on at Tech Nation, and we have a net zero program that launched about a month ago. We see companies from right across the UK making a huge positive impact in energy, in waste reduction, in things that we can sort of quite clearly see are having a great impact and a positive impact on the environment. But then I think it gets a bit trickier when thinking about impact, where you've got companies that are inherently combining purpose and profit. And I think that's where the impact database and people's contribution to the impact database will become far more nuanced and hopefully start to break new ground. Because I think to date, we've really been thinking about impact through the lens of tech for good, if you like, or tech for social good. But I think there's a lot more beyond that we need to try to capture. And I'd be really interested to hear what the other panelists think too.
Yeah, cool. So, I mean, there George is talking a lot about startups and kind of for-profit companies. How does impact also then come in with non-profits, and what does that kind of combination look like in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think the great advantage is that it can also be non-profits, but it has to be scalable, and it has to be innovations. And in the database, we look now also that you have a differentiation between that they are working in the core on the sustainable development core goals, and on the side. And I think it's really important to also look at companies that really solve in the core of their business model. They are looking, they contribute to the sustainable development goals. And I think Mikkel can also elaborate a little bit on this, how they have done that in the Nordics, but that's really, for me at the moment, where we look at and how we should advance on this, how you measure that, of course, but they can really contribute also to solving the sustainable development goals, which is, and of course you can also make a profit with it. I think if you look at the market for the sustainable development goals, to solve those sustainable development goals, we need trillions of dollars. It's $1 trillion marketplace. So this can perfectly be for-profit companies. It doesn't have to be, but it can be really for-profit companies. So sometimes you see it's a little bit the soft image impact companies have, or social enterprises, but yeah, it can be really profitable also.
Yeah, Mikkel, I'd like to hear your perspective on that as well, but in particular, the Nordic perspective, and also maybe you have a kind of vision on why it is that Europe has been so successful at impact. So we've seen that 15% of European VC is now going into impact companies, and that's kind of double the global rate. So why do you think it is that Europe is being so successful in this area?
Well, I think there are different reasons to that. I think that we've been looking at specifically on the Nordics, of course, because this is where our home base is. But we definitely have a stronghold when it comes to sustainability as such, ranking very high on different rankings when it comes to the ability of embedding and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So the prerequisites, you can say, are there. I definitely think also that part of the reason is also that we have a very strong kind of like direction setting from the EU and from national parties. I just to mention a few, kind of like the Green Deal, really setting the direction and putting a lot of money behind. But also, to quote one of the commissioners, Vestergaard, saying that some say that China has all the data, the US has all the money, but Europe has the purpose. So kind of like there is a part of this this identity also that we are front runners within this, and that also means that we have some responsibility in really taking this agenda forward.
Mm-hmm. And in order to take that agenda forward, I think part of what we've been discussing, well, we'll be discussing over the next couple of days, but what we're trying to do with the platform as well is bring together lots of different types of stakeholders to this debate and to the purpose, whether that's governments and accelerators, the startups themselves, the entrepreneurs, the nonprofits. As you're all from slightly different type of stakeholder groups, how do you see that mix being important and your roles within that? Let's go with you again, George.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, and as TechNation, we do very much act as a sort of intermediary between a number of different groups of stakeholders, from those tech leaders that are really pioneering, they're out in the field, they're grafting, and they're trying to make a change in some sort of really hard to change and very sort of, well, inertia driven environments where there are lots of big players and it's really difficult. What we do, I guess, as an organization is try to bring those pioneers together with government, with corporates, and really think about how we can make change by, I guess, acting as a broker. I think in the UK context and actually in the European context more broadly, and sort of building on that previous question, I think that as much as we should be celebratory about the fact that Europe is doing incredibly well in terms of sort of impact investment and impact-driven companies, I think really we have to see it as a necessity in staying, I guess, relevant and alive amongst the big players like China, the United States, India. I think that Europe has to differentiate itself, and I think that the impact ecosystem is one way in which we can do it. We can really act as a thought leader and an innovator and a pioneer. I think that again, Europe has that strong sense of governance, as Mikkel mentioned, and it has strong governments. It also has slightly smaller states than perhaps some of those that I mentioned, and we can be more experimental and entrepreneurial. So I think that one of the ways in which stakeholders can come together and actually make a really positive difference for these companies that are, trying to move sort of nigh on immovable objects when it comes to some of these big existing corporates that are in the landscape. Not the same for every sector, not the same for every company, of course, but in some cases very much so. I think what we can do is start to create new spaces for innovation, whether that's creating more experimental spaces, whether through sandboxes and other initiatives that enable consumer protection, but also enable companies to innovate, or whether it's about, I guess, cross-national collaborations and more sort of inter-European collaboration. I think that again is going to be a necessity to make sure that companies that are working in different nations across Europe actually have a critical market size to be able to expand and scale their products and services. So what I see as really being the future, and where I see organizations like those on the panel and probably many in the audience as well playing a role in this, is really by facilitating that cross-fertilization, collaboration, and really leveraging our strength as Europe.
Cool. And as one of those big corporates that George mentioned, Mikkel, how do you see Danske Bank and the private sector plugging into this piece as well?
Yeah, but I think that for all startups, it's so important to have a supporting ecosystem, and I think that especially when it comes to the impact startups. Some years ago, we did a study finding out that 87% of the impact startups mentioned that the lack of awareness and lack of supporting ecosystem, that was a challenge for them in order to scale, basically. And I think that it's important to understand that a lot of the startups are actually kind of like trying out new grounds, finding new business models, finding out new ways of doing these different things. And that means that they bump into a lot of barriers, both from a regulatory point of view, but also kind of like financially speaking, and a lot of myths being very positive, but also very negative towards them. I think definitely for the funding part, I think that the most powerful thing is if we are able to mainstream the startups acting on similar terms as other startups. That's in my belief the way that we can move forward the most quickly.
So on that point, do you think that Impact has a bit of a branding problem, that it's seen as something that might be a bit worthy but not kind of either good or profitable or something like that? Is that something that still needs to be worked on?
I think things have changed a lot in just a few years. First of all, I think when I'm speaking about impact startups, we are very much focusing on the for-profit startups, and basically, as Cos was also mentioning, the ones that have one of more the SDGs as part of the core of the business, basically, and able to scale. But what we can actually see is that these startups, they have a branding problem that you don't really, you see this as a bit of a more soft, but in reality, when looking at the startups, we did a study on 1,000 impact startups in the Nordics, and seeing that 98% of these startups were actually able to kind of like use the impact part to enhance or improve the profit side. So that it does go hand in hand. And I think in general there are. I think it's important to understand that the impact startups more and more start to resemble more conventional startups in the same vertical as they actually do compared to other startups. So they are operating on a lot of the similar terms. They are also using deep tech or tech as part of the business. They are 60% of them are deploying scalable business models. Approximately half of the founders are serial entrepreneurs, and so on. So we definitely see a mainstreaming of the impact space.
I think it's interesting.
Oh yeah, go on.
Sorry, if I might just, really important points. And I think we did a report a few years ago looking at something slightly different. We looked at tech for social good companies in the UK. But what we said in that report was, I don't want to be talking about tech for social good companies in 2 years' time, 5 years' time. We don't think that should be relevant anymore in that time period. They should just be companies, and the way that all companies operate in that sort of purposeful and impact-driven modality. That might have been a bit ambitious when we wrote it, but I sort of think we're there now, and I think you're absolutely right, Mikkel. And I think that actually, in the interest of sort of again mentioning the database, we'll probably start to see both a huge growth in the impact and innovation database, and a real sort of resemblance to Dealroom's other database. And we'll probably see them sort of become very, very similar over the next few years, because these companies are going to have to innovate and become more impactful in order to survive. And I think at the moment, obviously, we're thinking about impact, and we're looking at companies that are doing this because really I guess they feel that they can offer something unique to the environment that they're operating in. And I don't mean the physical environment, but the sort of ecosystem they're operating in. But I think inherently over the next 5 years, we're going to see these companies be the survivors, and the others that don't adopt this impact-driven agenda and aren't purposeful are not going to. So yeah, I think even taking your point a little bit further, Mikhail, I think that it's really essential that companies look to this, and in fact that we look at the database and see what these companies are doing and what huge impact they're already having, so that we can learn from it, and so that founders and tech leaders can learn from these great examples that already exist out there in Europe and the UK.
And Koos, do you think the same kind of thing can happen with non-profits, in that if there's been such a shift in the perception of impact startups already, can the same happen where non-profits will be looked at as companies that can be scalable and that can have a huge amount of impact, to overuse the word again?
Yeah, that's what you see now. You see also, like, but that's more within the impact investment church, I would say. There is a branch, there is part which is focusing on more venture philanthropy. So also investors that really look for impact investments first from a social return, but normally they will only give grants, but now they do also investments. And they really invest in scalable non-profit companies. And they always look how many lives do we improve with these investments. And this is a movement, I have to say, this also comes from the US. So I see a lot of impact investors from the US. And now, so tomorrow we will, for example, here in The Hague, we will announce that there will be a big US venture philanthropy fund coming to The Hague, DRK Foundation. But also here in Europe, we have many philanthropy and many NGOs who are part of this impact ecosystem. And if we integrate them better in the ecosystem, they're really credible as impact parties, but they haven't been always so successful in the innovation part, in the technical part, in the tech part. So I think we really can bring the best of both worlds together. Because the challenges, like Miguel and George were saying, this is actually, we have big challenges also to open up governments, NGOs. Yeah, if you see the goals we have the next coming years, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, they're so big. We need all the impact makers and innovators in the world actually to solve it. You also see it with the COVID situation. What role can tech really play to solve or to help us get out of all those lockdowns, for example? Yeah, so I'm really, I think this can be a solution if we bring all the impact makers, bring it together. And this database is really crucial for that, to make it transparent who is part of this ecosystem.
Cool. And George, on a point that Koos just made there in terms of companies looking to measure the impact, you work in insights, and this database is tracking venture capital and growth metrics and things like that. But are there other things that we should be tracking?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, because we're not comparing sort of apples with apples, I guess, when we're thinking about impact. We're comparing sort of apples with bananas and trying to put a pounds and pence value on something that's really actually very difficult to put a pounds and pence value on, or a euros and cents value. But nevertheless, it's incredibly important for us to think about and to value social and the public, the sort of cultural impact that these companies are having. I think there are a number of different ways that you can start to bottom that out. And in some ways, I've seen some of the best examples of measurement of impact actually almost sort of playing the same game as conventional companies, and really thinking about it through economic impact and trying to convert social impact into economic impact. I mean, as I mentioned, I used to work at Nesta, got a strong impact investment remit at Nesta. We looked to cover things from social impact through to sort of arts impact, and had funds to do that. I mean, at TechNation, the way that we measure our impact, really, in thinking about the impact on the UK, is through gross value added. But a lot of that will sort of have to work back from the impact that we're having on companies. And I think in many ways, we're going to have to establish similar, probably not 100% standardized, but at least with some degree of uniformity, we'll have to establish metrics to enable companies to be able to compare the impact they're having and not just think in purely economic terms. But it's a really hard question again, Ola. And I think some of the sort of organizations that are doing this really well I think there's a real responsibility for them to perhaps join up to a greater extent, and for us to have a real, maybe around the database, it could be a way in which we start to sort of capture beyond investment, because investment's important. Investment is fuel for growth, but actually there are lots of things that are outputs of these companies that we aren't capturing at the moment. Maybe the database could be a great way to think about capturing some of those impacts, capturing the purposeful nature of these companies, and really trying to get a true gauge on their value. So I think it's really a call for action more than anything. Those people that are working in this space, that are working in sort of the measurement of impact-driven startups, scale-ups, companies more broadly, I think they should get in touch, and we should come together and start to think about how we measure this together in a way that we can really start to articulate their value.
That's for sure. I would add that the database is very much a starting point, but we're looking for input from everybody within the ecosystem. So everyone watching, please do log on and tell us what we're missing, tell us what we need to build out next. But in terms of other kind of takeaways or things that we would love to have on our list of achievements for the next few years as an ecosystem, what do you think could really make some of the biggest difference in incentivizing impact-based entrepreneurship and impact activity in general? And that could be, I want some of your best ideas, you can throw them at me, but it can be anything from changing school curriculums to government regulation. But yeah, open floor. Let's start with Mikkel.
Yeah, but I think first of all, I would like to echo a little bit what George was saying beforehand, and also kind of like kind of using the rationale, saying, okay, so if these startups are actually starting to resemble more and more traditional growth startups, then it becomes really relevant in order to start being much more clear on what is actually the impact that they are providing. And I definitely look forward to seeing that journey. I would love to see that we could start kind of like having a similar journey as the tech revolution. So going back some years ago, you probably wouldn't be talking about customer acquisition cost or lifetime value and so on for your customers, and as key metrics for measuring the success. So that is something that has been built over time and kind of like being the right ways of measuring success and performance. And that process, I think, is going to be really crucial for the impact startups, that we try to actually mirror what has been working good when it comes to the tech startup scene, and can we actually talk about similar things when it comes to the impact space. So when talking about market potential at the early stage of a company, we should be talking about the impact potential, and similarly being able to articulate similar kind of like the development journeys for an impact startup. I think that's one thing. When it comes to also incentivizing, and you were talking about tax and government regulations and so on, I definitely, I think there are some exciting things about that, but I think one thing that is really important to understand is that we have 10 years before we are supposed to have reached the Sustainable Development Goals. And that means that actually the startups, the impact startups that we are looking at right now, they are the ones that are about to scale the solutions and provide the solutions that we need in order to achieve these targets. So there is a bit of an urgency, and when we start talking about regulation and so on, I think typically that is something, of course, also really important, but it also takes time. So I think one of the really key things, if we are to succeed, is to be able to actually demonstrate that these impact startups can succeed on you could say more traditional terms, so that you get mainstream investors on board, and a lot of the other things in order to be able to scale as quickly as we actually are needing.
True. I think, yeah, that's a good point about we actually don't have time for some of the things that we might need to do. But Koos, what would you say is, I mean, would you kind of any other thoughts or things that you think that if you could wave a magic wand or click your fingers and really do something to accelerate impact entrepreneurship and the impact space, what would be top of your wish list?
On my top of list would be the opening up the government, the different national governments and the European government with the Green Deal, which was mentioned. But if you see only the procurement and also the social cost the governments have to also address the sustainable development goals, I think these are such big markets for those impact companies that if we can open it up, and I think it's now only a very small percentage which is opened up. I know how difficult it is. So we with Impact City, we have a program called Startup in Residence where we post our challenges. We do that with different government organizations, but that's still very small. So if you really, as a government now, we have to test, we have to be more open to the entrepreneurs, really give big assignments. And if we don't do that, I think it will be really difficult to for them to really have a big market and also to become credible, because it really helps if governments are clients of them. And then also traditional corporates will join. They will join, I think, but the governments can play a crucial role, I think, in this whole impact scene. Yeah. So, and also we should use Europe as test with the smaller countries. We can test it perfectly in different countries and see which share best practices, and see if a certain company is really successful in a certain country, we should scale it up to the rest of Europe. That's always been, yeah, I hope really the single market then works finally, because sometimes that's not the case in my opinion, but that should be really, really nice if we can make that work in the coming 10 years.
Cool. And George, I see you scribbling away. I wonder if you had any thoughts on that in particular.
Yeah, I do. I was trying to almost just like hone my thinking a bit, but I think it's fundamentally all about education. And I've got 3 points on that because I've written them down.
Education.
Yeah, no, I'm not going Blair on you. So first of all, it's about consumers. And I think actually where investors are going to be led is by consumer choice. And so I think fundamentally we have to educate consumers around the choices that they're making. And I think there's a real groundswell already. It might sound like a big ask, but I think a lot of it is just around raising awareness about what these companies are doing and allowing people the sort of openness of information and transparency of information to make fully informed choices. Because I think at the moment that doesn't exist. And I think that's why things like the database are really important. Maybe that's about the sort of second point around education of others in the ecosystem, whether it's investors, whether it's support organizations. Really, I think the database, in the same way that the data commons for UK Tech, a UK Tech specific version of this that we put together with Dealroom, is really useful because it provides, I guess, equality of access to information. It's fundamentally important, but the information in itself is not enough. We need to be able to disseminate it effectively to those audiences because they're not going to just find it on their own. And then finally, I think taking a slightly different stance and not necessarily focusing on government, but actually thinking about the impact companies themselves. And these companies, I think, if we take the position that they're much like lots of other tech companies, they're going to have their fair share of challenges in scaling, in growth. And I guess as TechNation, we work with scaling tech companies from the sort of early stage right through to the late stage. And I think that it's really important that impact companies have the same opportunity for access to this sort of information around scaling, to be able to collaborate with peers, both peers that are in the impact space and perhaps not so strongly identifiable as impact-driven companies, because they're going to face the same problems probably when scaling. They might face some of their own unique problems as well as impact companies. But I think fundamentally we need to be able to provide that sort of support and education, might be funding, might be other things, to impact companies in order to help them scale and achieve that growth. So really it's about consumers, it's about other stakeholders in the ecosystem, and it's about the companies themselves. And I think we all, and I'm talking about the audience as well, but we all have a role to play in providing that support and in helping educate those different groups.
And on those other stakeholders again, so going back to corporates, and Mikhail, maybe you'll have some perspective on this, but I wonder whether we talked about impact branding, but is there still an issue with the branding of startups in general for corporates and procuring services from startups? You hear talk about there being a big difference between the US and Europe in terms of whether a corporate will use the services of a startup. Is that changing, do you think, or is that actually something that fundamentally needs to change as well in order for any of these companies to be able to get their foot in the door?
I think that that we do see corporates showing quite a lot of interest in getting kind of like contact to the startups and both kind of like as corporate innovation, but also simply tapping into the innovation, and the new services that the startups are able to provide. I also think that is also really crucial when you look at different types of impact startups. For instance, within circular economy and so forth. Typically, they are part of a longer value chain and need this cooperation between the different links in the value chain in order to make take back systems and so forth work. So this cooperation between the startups and corporates and other actors are so important, and I definitely see that this is also something that corporates are realizing and reaching out to get, basically.
Great. Well, we've got a few minutes left, but I just want to give another call out for any questions from the audience. Please submit them now, and we'll try and get to them at the end of the session. But we've kind of covered a lot of ground already, which is amazing. And we've kind of talked a little bit about how the ecosystem has changed and how it's evolved and kind of coming of age. But that's kind of in the past and the present. And as Mikhail said, there's not long left before we need to meet these goals. So what's going to happen in the future? Where do you see European impact in the next 5 years? Where will there be growth? Where will it be geographically, sector-wise? What's coming down the path? Mikhail, maybe you can go first.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that now we've been talking about European kind of like performing good compared to the other parts of the world. I definitely hope, I don't know if it will happen, but I definitely hope that the other parts will also take up the challenge, and because I think this is really a global challenge where we need all on board, basically, and in order to get to some solutions. I think that's so hopefully we'll also see growth and making the ecosystem mature in some of the other parts. I think when it comes to some of the areas, I think that we've been touching upon this about the Green Deal, the green transformation, circular economy, and so on. There are so many huge challenges within that space that we definitely see a lot of startups being part of that and are able to actually provide some very interesting solutions to some of these problems.
Koos, what do you see for the future?
Yeah, I think definitely new energy will be in field. You already see that. That's such a big market. We have to adapt so much that's definitely one, which you already see some great companies, startups that have been successful. Food is another one, which you see also some great exits already of companies. But my hope is also that that's maybe because I'm from The Hague, and also humanitarian innovation. So really innovations that do stuff in developing countries and also help us with really big issues in those countries. And I know also, for example, in India, many impact makers are also working over there and in other countries to do that. So I really hope also the best people in tech will contribute to those issues. So yeah, and that's maybe not the most profitable niche in the world, but it's really a necessity that we also look in that direction.
If I may add a little bit on that, because I completely agree with you on that. If we were to be a little bit critical on some of the impact startups, what we see when mapping the impact space in the Nordics is that only 4% of the startups are actually only focusing on low income markets. So basically, the countries where you have the largest challenges and problems that needs to be solved, we only see a few that are dedicated towards these markets. And that's of course a little bit of a discrepancy when looking at, so are they actually addressing the biggest challenges that we see? So hopefully we will see more startups focusing in on the low income markets.
And George, any thoughts from you? You might have alluded to it earlier when you said hopefully all startups will be impact startups, but yeah. What do you see?
Let's pledge to not be talking about this in 2 years' time, because we won't need to. I think for me, it's right now in the UK and in Europe. I think there's an opportunity. Of course, things are up in the air. It's been a hard year and a hard year for everyone. And I think economic recovery is on the lips of everyone in government, and building back better is very much the sort of mentality that we're taking across Europe and across the UK. So I think as well as sort of transformation and sort of next generation transformation of companies across the economy through new technologies like AI and blockchain and IoT, we know these sorts of technologies, they're now being applied to other areas that are having sort of real transformative impact. I think we're also going to see transformation in terms of a sort of a purpose-driven transformation. And the areas that I'm most excited in or about are in sort of health, mobility, finance. And I think your point around sort of low-income groups, but really everyone, is financial inclusion and sort of financial education, because I think, fintechs haven't really catered to that to the extent that they could be doing, and thinking about sort of global markets as well, and fintech, of course, being important in the UK tech scene as well as across Europe. And then finally, again, alluded to agriculture and food. And I think those 4 areas, health, mobility, finance, and agriculture and food, are for me the most exciting and pioneering in terms of what we see in the UK, certainly. And what I'm excited about, I'm also obviously very sort of sanguine about, is the fact that, we're building back. We're building back from what has been a really hard year, but I think there are great opportunities, and I have a lot of hope because I see some of these companies doing such great work and really having such positive impacts on the economies, on the societies that they're based in, that I think we are going to build back better. I think these companies need our support to do so.
Nice. Well, I've got lots more questions of my own, but we've only got so much time, so I think it's only fair we go to the audience. So I think we've got a couple here. Let me have a look. So how should deep tech VCs market themselves within this space? Impact investor is likely too niche and with a risk of greenwashing. What would the approach be here? Koos, do you have a feeling on that?
Yeah, I think so. This is really, it depends, of course, on which key technology they are focusing, but it really should improve the lives of people. And that's on the one hand, that's always, you see, that's also really the difficult with all the deep tech and also the skepticism about that new technologies. I think it's really crucial to have the people and the consumers in the heart of the products, and also also everyone. That there's a lot of discussion about this, and this is also with AI, and also we think as Europe that we can make a difference on this. But so investors should be really critical when they invest in a deep tech company, that they really have those the consumer or the people in the heart of their business models. So this is actually maybe one of the really sectors we will see. If they don't do that, you will have the same situation as a little bit what you now see with big tech companies, which face a lot of skepticism in the public opinion. And also, that's also dangerous for their businesses. So as an investor, I would definitely look into that angle and really measure it, try to work with it.
And do you think there's a mechanism for them to be held to account, whether that's by media or some kind of industry body that will, really hold judgment on people about what their claims are?
Yeah, media. I hope the media can play that role still, and and also politics. You see that already. The European Parliament is already posting some new legislation, but also even in the US, you see that now is coming. New legislation in the Senate. So for big tech companies, so if you don't, but you hope they can be. It doesn't have to go that far. So I hope really they have people testing it with clients, with people that really use it in practice, and not make it such a tech product that nobody is really, the consumer is not part of it.
Any thoughts from the other panelists, Mick or George?
Yeah, I basically, I think I would really love to see that the impact startups are kind of like mirroring kind of like the journey that we typically associate with the tech companies. So even though that you are a deep tech company, basically from the starting point in the idea stage, that then you have some kind of an intent on what type of a problem is it that you are solving. Basically, when you have a product market fit stage, then you actually should go out and find out, so what is the impact fit? How do you actually solve the impact problem at the same way as you would talk about solving a customer problem? And again, and when starting scaling and using going to that, then you also need to understand how can you actually optimize and scale and so forth, also from an impact point of view. So basically trying to transfer a lot of the ways of working as a tech startup and then applying that to the impact space in order to get the same agility and momentum and the ability to scale the solutions really quickly and be spot on, basically. I think that is really crucial. So being a tech startup and deep tech within impact, applying the same mechanisms or the same techniques and the way of thinking to the impact space.
From my perspective, I think, and obviously sort of the question was around sort of how should investors market themselves? I think, to be honest, actions speak louder than words, and I think that's always going to be the case. I think that it's definitely sort of building on the points that have been mentioned. It's about consumer focus and really being able to evidence the extent to which you're investing in impact-driven companies. It's being transparent and being open and providing information. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done around that. And actually, there are lots of incentives for investors, not just VCs, but investors more broadly, not to do that. But I think we have to try and make a more open and sort of inclusive environment where information is shared to a greater extent. And I think then that can drive a lot of other positive things. And I think finally, a point that hasn't really been mentioned, and I think sort of aligns this debate sort of slightly different, but it's the patience with which capital is deployed. And I think having patient capital, particularly in sort of the early stages for some of these organizations, and especially in the deep tech space, patient capital is always going to be needed where you've got R&D heavy processes, but perhaps even more so when it's more sort of impact driven deep tech companies. I think that's going to be a crucial measure to determine whether VCs are actually sort of living up to their language or not. And I think it would be sort of down to them, I guess, to determine whether they want to sort of start to disclose those sort of things. I would say that it's probably going to be a really good thing if they did.
Cool. Well, I hope that was useful to Kathy. And we'll do one more, I think we'll have time for one more last question. So how do you think the EU can improve in better supporting impact startups? Again, another easy question. Anyone want to jump in? Oh, no, nobody.
I'll do a very brief one. And I mean, this is from someone from the UK, of course, talking. But nevertheless, I think what I said before about sort of cross-national fertilization of ideas and spaces for experimentation, I think that's probably one of the best ones. And I think there's always going to be huge value in being able to leverage the European market as opposed to individual national markets. And I think that could be one way in which government at the European level can really support these companies and can enable these companies to achieve the scale that they need in order to start to penetrate other really large, really competitive global markets like China, the US, India, and so forth. So that would be that's my 2 pence worth.
Pence, not cents.
Basically, I think that as mentioned before about the Green Deal putting a man on the moon, as was stated, I think setting that direction is really important. I would like to also kind of like highlight an initiative by you, Chris, the Impact City, kind of like where the city of Hague is kind of like acting as the test market for startups, and basically kind of like offering this opportunity of being the first paying customer, I imagine. I think that's a brilliant initiative in order to help the startups from a very practical point of view.
Nice. Well, we are just about out of time, but I'd like to thank all of you and everyone that's tuned in, but also our panelists, George, Koos, and Mikkel, for joining. As a little roundup, so this is kind of your own words of what we'd like in order to be able to achieve building impact ecosystems, but we need to back what's already there. We need to open up the governments, and in George's words, we need education for consumers, for non-profits and other ecosystem stakeholders, and for the startups themselves, and try and basically bring everyone together into one space, which hopefully we're going to be able to start with this platform as well. Please do log on and explore the platform. If you have any feedback, or if there's anything that you see that, that could be improved, that's missing, please let us know. It is just a starting point, but we are really excited about it. And thanks again for joining. Have a great rest of ImpactFest.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Orla.